And this is Dana with Dana Digital Tutorials. And with this video, I'm going to show you how to create a repeating pattern around text or an object. So here I've got some layouts. You'll see I have some layers here, a photo that we'll work on a little bit. I have a solid color just so you can see what I'm doing. And then I have the text layer. I have CS for cross stitch. We're working with a cross stitch pattern today. And we are going to put it around these letters, and then we'll put it around a photograph. The pattern will work on anything you can draw a path around. There are some quick ways to draw a path, which we'll do, but you can also manually draw a path. You will be working with the brush tool today, the marquee tool, and then the curvature pen tool. If you click and hold the pen, here is our curvature pen. And I have used that, I almost always use that so it remembers, and when I hit P it goes straight to the curvature pen tool. But we're going to start with our brush tool. So we're going to hit B for brush, and it's right here. And we're going to select our brush. I'm going to use the hard round brush. If your pattern is more swirly or swoopy, you may find that this one works a little bit better. But for today we're going to use this one. And then we're going to come over and we're just going to draw our X. Now, you're going to want to get your X about where you want for a cross stitch. Maybe this is a little too thick of a stroke and brush size, so maybe you want to undo that and you want to change your brush size. The best way to change your brush size is the open and close bracket, because I can visualize what I'm seeing. I can change it up here by clicking this area, but then I've got to kind of go back and forth until I get what I want. You can also change it in the brushes panel. They give you all kinds of ways. So it's right here, click on window and brushes, and it'll pop up for you. And you can change the brush size there as well. But I like to stick with the open and close brackets. It is much easier to do. Now, once you've got your shape drawn, it is drawn on a blank layer. We do need it on a blank layer, but we're not going to keep the shape. So we're going to go ahead and use this to define our brush. So I'm going to hold down the command. If you're on a PC, it'll be control. Anytime I say command, it will be a control on PC. So command, I'm going to hover over the little box and I'm going to click it. Because the X is the only thing drawn on that layer, it is picking just the X. Then we're going to go to edit, define brush preset. You'll want to name it, because if they're all named sampled brush, it's going to be difficult to find your brushes later. I like to name them. And then I have named my brush. So I want to keep the blank layer, but I don't want to keep this X. So I'm just going to command exit, and you can see it didn't get rid of all of it. So I'll just erase. And if you notice, it did switch straight to my my preset and on the brush, but I actually mean to be on erase. So I'm just going to erase that. I'm going to keep this layer. We're going to use that. So let's go back to our brush tool and let's set it up. We're going to click on, I have it right here, it's brush settings. If you don't see it, you'll have to go to window, brush settings, and then it'll pop up. So on our brush settings, we're going to adjust our spacing until we like it. So maybe we want them really close, or maybe we want them really far. You can decide. And I'm going to, for today's video, set this size at 14. Now you're going to want to notate the size that you've chosen, because we're going to have to modify our selection before creating the work path, which is in the pen tool. Because the way this works is if I take my brush here, it's going to draw the middle right along the pen line. If I want it to draw on the inside, I'm going to have to divide my brush size by half and adjust my selection. It's very easy to do. I'll show you how to do it. And we're going to start by creating our selection. The easiest way to do this, because this is on its own layer, is just to do like we did the brush, hold Command or Control, click on the text layer. We don't need to actually select the text layer, we're just selecting this area, but we are going to be drawing on this blank layer, so we want to have this selected. Now, once we have that selected, we're going to need to make a work path, which is easy to find under right click, but you have to be in the right tool to find it, which is not the pen tool like it feels like it should be. It's actually the marquee tool. So we're going to hit M or select it over here, and then we can right click and we can make work path. Now, if I were to have this at the max, which is 10, you're going to see it's going to do a very poor job here. If I had something more straight, like a box or a simple circle, this higher number would be okay. It would give me less movement in my image, but I don't want that, so I undid it. Shortcut is Command Z, and I am going to make the work path again, and I'm going to set it as the lowest setting, which is 1. And now you can see it's done a pretty good job, but on more complex drawings, it might still struggle. And you can adjust this by now clicking on the pen tool, which is P, and it's right there. You want to make sure you're in the curvature pen, right there. And you noticed it went away, and that's okay, because as soon as I click on an area on the line, it's going to come back. If I accidentally click out here, it's going to start a new path. We don't want that, so just undo, and then you can click back on your layer. You can adjust any of these little settings. These here are all curve areas, but these are a straight line area, like a hard turn. The way to get a hard turn is to hold down your Option when creating a new path. You can also change a curve to a hard line or a hard turn, and vice versa, by holding down the Option key and just clicking on the item that you want. Let me drag it out so you can see it. I clicked the Option as I clicked it, so it changed it to a harsh curve. If I click Option and click it again, now it's a softer curve, and that is the easiest way to change them back and forth. But you can just drag these, you can add extra points, however you need to do it. Now that we have that drawn, if I were to go back into my brush tool, so we're going back and forth a little bit, and then I just hit enter, you can see that it's hard to see, it's there, but we're going to undo that, and we're going to change our color to white so that you can see it better. And now let me hit enter, and it's still very hard to see. And I've noticed that it's very faded out, and the reason for that is because I have my opacity on my brush way set low. So let me undo that, and let me come up here and change my opacity to 100. Now if I hit enter, you can see my lines are nice and bright. You will see that these are really close together, so if you don't like that, when we finish what we're doing, you can go in and just erase the one that you don't want. But this has done a pretty good job for the most part. Now, what if I want these stitches to be all the way inside my object, like you would normally see on a cross stitch sewing like this? So let's undo that. What we're going to want to do is this 14, divide it in half. So that would be 7. And we're going to go backwards until we get to our selection tool. I just undid until I got there. And we're going to modify this selection. We need to bring it in by half because it drew half of that pattern on the outside and half on the inside. So if you go to select and then you go to modify, and we're going to contract it because we want to bring it in. If we wanted it on the outside, we would do the same thing, but we would expand. So we're going to contract, and we're going to go by 7 because we currently have the brush size of 14. And now you can see our selection is smaller. So now if I right click and see I'm in the brush tool, so it's bringing up my brush options. So I want to escape. I want to hit the marquee tool, which is M, right click, make work path, keep it at 1, and hit OK. Now I'm going to go back to my brush tool, and it still remembers everything that I did, and I'm going to hit enter. And now you can see that it has put the pattern on the inside. If I didn't want it white, I could have picked any color, so let me undo that. And let me come over here and maybe pick a blue. I don't want it too dark because it'll be hard to see on this black. So now we're going to hit enter, and now you can see that we have blue, but we have a line. So how do we get rid of that line? We're going to go over to paths, and we're just going to right click and delete, or you could drag it down to the trash can. And there is your cross stitch. But why did I draw it on its own layer? Well, I drew it on its own layer because if I drew this pattern bigger, maybe I would want to add some effects to it. So let's go back and let's make this pattern bigger, and I'll show you what I mean. So we're going to undo that. We're going to undo all the way back to our selection of the CS, and we're going to take this up to, say, 30. Now that means I need to modify my selection by 15 instead of by the 7 that we did before. So I'm going to go to Select, Modify, Contract, and I'm going to do 15. And now we've gone in further. I'm going to go to my Marquee tool, M, right click, Make Work Path, keep it at the 1, and if I wanted to make any adjustments here, I can. Then I'm going to go back to my brush tool, and I'm going to hit enter. And now I have a bigger pattern on the same text. It's still in blue, but what do we do to make it look a little more 3D when we have a 3D image? Well, let's create a pattern on an image. So I'm going to delete this work path, and I'm going to go to this layer, and I'm going to Command or Control A, and I'm just going to hit delete. That way everything on there is gone, but I still have my layer. I'm going to hide these two, and I'm just going to bring this up to the top. I don't need to bring it to the top, I'm just doing that. Command D to get rid of that selection, and I'm going to go into my magic wand. Now you're probably going to see this magic wand. We want the object selection tool for this. And if you notice, I hover over my object and it's automatically selecting it pretty well. I can see some areas down there that aren't perfect, so I might want to use my lasso tool to take those out. So if I go to lasso and I go to the subtract, or you can hold down the option, both of those work. And I just come in here and I unselect this area that I don't want it to work on. And maybe I don't want it to work on this area, so I unselect. And because I have my lasso, I always forget you have to click on the lasso. This is why I like to use the J, even though I'm not patching anything, which is the patch tool. I just like to use it to draw. So if I do the J and I do subtract selection, then I can actually just draw around it. And see, I went outside. So that's why I'll use my option key. And you see that plus come up? So then I can just draw. This is what I do most of the time, and I'm just so used to doing it that it takes me a minute to realize what's going on when I try to do it the slow method way. And maybe I want that leg, so I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to select that leg. But I'm going to just work on this until I get it where I want. Once I have it where I want, we're going to now draw the cross stitch pattern. But you notice I'm on this layer. If I draw it here, it's going to be a flat part of the image, and I cannot make any further adjustments to it. So I want to be on my blank layer up here. And we're going to go to the brush tool. We're going to leave it at 30. But remember, if we want it on the inside, we're going to have to shrink by 15. And so let's go to Selection, Modify, Contract by 15. It remembers our last one. We're going to go into the Marquee tool first so that we can make our work path. And we're going to leave it at 1. Now it's going to struggle a little bit more with this because of the shrinking and the size with the dinosaur. So you may have to stick with a smaller pattern, but for today we're going to just stick with this. We're going to go back to our brush tool. It remembers our settings, and we're going to hit enter. If I didn't like this, I'll go ahead and do it. And I undo that, and I reduce my spacing just a little bit, and I reduce my size down. I can do that, but then I'm going to have to go backwards, and I'm going to have to change how much I've selected. So I just went backwards, and so let's say we make it, well, let's make it a 20. So Selection, Modify, Contract by a 10, because that's half of the brush size. And then we're going to go to our brush, actually we're going to go to our Marquee tool, It's a whole bunch of steps, but it's pretty easy once you get used to it. Make work path. Then we're going to go to our brush tool. And if once we have that done, it remembers the settings that we just set. So we hit enter and there's our X's. Let's delete our path and let's look at what we have. So we don't need that path anymore. And then we can come up here and we can see it's not put all of these X's exactly where we would want, just because this is such an intricate small area. So this is where you may want to go with a smaller spacing and a smaller brush size to be able to get it to follow all those areas, and also maybe work on your pen once you've got all of these done so that you've got some nice soft curves. But I want to show you one more thing on this. Because we kept it on its own layer for right now, we can actually make this look a little more 3D like the image. And how do we do that? Well, we stay on this layer, and if you'll notice, I can actually move this around. It's not attached. It's like sunglasses. You're looking at it through like you have something on your sunglasses and you can't see through it. So we're going to come over here, down here at the bottom. If you see my mouse, I'm going to click FX, making sure I'm on this layer here. And then we're going to click bevel and emboss. Now, I kind of played with these settings, and these were the settings I found worked really well for this size. And basically what I used was pillow emboss. You can screenshot this. Chisel soft, I did the depth at the minimum, and I did the size at 0 and the soften at 0. Because if I go out, you can see there's just not enough text for it to work with. I could go up or down, whichever way you want to do it, but I played with this until I got it the way I wanted. I didn't touch these areas down here. You could adjust these, so like if I wanted to come up and really play with them, I can go back and forth, but I just left them where they were. And then I'm going to hit OK. Now I'm going to zoom out. My dinosaur has the stitches around it. And once I've refined my selections, those stitches will look even better. And now I can flatten it so it's part of the image. So if I come up here and I select it, if I just hit Command E, as long as it's the layer right underneath is visible and it's the layer I want it to mash into, I like to say, you can see it's going to mash them right together. If you're not sure, you can also click, hold down the Shift, select the layer you want and Command or Control E, or you can go to Layer and Merge Layers. If you did Merge Visible, it would merge everything that's visible. If you did Flatten, it would delete those hidden layers and it would make a flattened lock background layer. So Merge Layers. And now if I try to move these little X's, you can see they don't move anymore, because now instead of being a speck in the glass, it's a permanent speck in my eye, if you will. So that is how you create that pattern. And if I undo this, right, and I delete this completely, and I create another new layer, I could also create the stitching that people like to put around the appliques by just drawing on this blank layer a straight line. It's a little more difficult to do because it takes a couple more steps, but I'm going to go back up to my hard brush and I'm going to make sure I have a black, and I'm going to hold down my Shift key and I'm just going to draw a line. So that's good enough. Maybe I want it a little more chunky, so I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to use my close bracket, make it a little bit bigger, and I'm going to draw a line about that long. I don't want to draw the line across the top. It doesn't line up really well on the item that we're drawing on, so I'm just going to draw the straight line. Then I'm going to come up here, I'm going to select it, I'm going to go to Edit, Define Brush, and we're just going to call it a stitch. And by the way, you can organize your brushes. If you go into brushes, which is right here, and your brushes and your brush settings are both right here if you can't find them. And you can create a folder, and you could call this, say, stitches. And then you can drag your stitches into that folder. It makes it easier to find everything if you're going to use these a lot. You can also save your brush presets. I know I'm getting sidetracked here, but let me just show you. So once I have my brush preset where I want, let me go ahead and do that. And I probably want those spaced about like that. And maybe I don't want them so big. Let me highlight over, use my bracket tool to get it about where I want, probably about right there. And I'm going to go into Shape Dynamics. And if we didn't do that before, you definitely need to do that. Shape Dynamics, Direction. And what that does is the first time we drew the X's, it just kind of put them all in the same size. But when we do the direction for the Shape Dynamics, it's going to follow. So let me show you the difference. My brush tip is all set. And if I like the way this applies, I will actually show you how to save a preset. So we're going to go over to our wand tool. We're going to click on this layer here. We're going to select it. And we are going to go to another new layer because I didn't delete that brush preset that was right there. And then we're going to go to brush. Actually, we're going to go to marquee. I'm going all back and forth. I am so sorry. Marquee, make work path, leave it at 1. Now, if I draw right now, half my line is going to be on the outside and half of my line is going to be on the inside. So let me undo that by just hitting Command or Control Z. Let me see my brush size. It's a 10. So I'm going to go to Selection, Modify, Contract, and 5. And then I'm going to do my pen tool under the marquee. Right click, make work path. Now we have our work path and we're on a blank layer. Now we can go into our brush and we can hit enter. And you'll see the difference is now it's following the angle with my pen tool. If you see, they're all in a nice direction, and I did not do that on the cross stitch. I forgot to do that. If I wanted the cross or these lines to be on this area too, I would have to make a second work path around those shapes, maybe using my color selection tool to be able to do the stitching on those areas. But we are missing a section. So we need the outer line stitch, and the best way to do that is to make a stroke path, but not in the way that we typically do. And instead what we're going to do is, you normally would come down here if you're going to put a stroke, say around text or something. We're not going to do it that way. What we're going to do is we're going to click on our image. We're going to go to wand. Let's actually delete our path. We don't need that path anymore. Let's get it out of our way. So we're on the wand. We're going to select it. This time we're not going to modify our selection. We can draw it right where our stitches were, or we can draw it on a separate line if we don't like it. I find about 25% of the stroke length is good for this. You don't want it to be the same or it's going to cover them all. So we're going to go to Edit, Stroke. So our brush size was about a 10, so I'll leave it about a 2, maybe a 3, and I'm going to hit Enter. Now, what this does, let me get out of that, is it puts a line on the way I selected it. It put a line on the inside of my selection. So if I hide this area, you can see it's on its own layer. When you use the stroke feature down here in the FX, it's actually going to create an adjustable stroke around an object, but we didn't want that. We wanted it on our own layer. That way, if we applied an emboss effect here, it would be on both of these stitch areas. Now let me zoom out and you can see that our dinosaur now looks like he was stitched onto the scene. We could repeat this with the different sections. Maybe we want to stitch the bird and the house. Every path that you pick, you can do this. But I know I like the brush preset, or the brush settings, so let's save those before we lose them. We're going to go into brush, and we're going to come over here, and we're going to click these 3 little dots, and we're going to click New Brush Preset, or you can hit the plus down here. Either one works. And we're going to name this, and we're going to name this just Stitch. We could name it Applique Stitch, or just Stitch, however you want to name it. Now we have a brush right here called stitch. Now, the first time we set a brush, it was called stitch, so you may want to differentiate in what you name those. You can rename if you realize that you've made a mistake by coming over here and just clicking it, and then I could say brush with presets, and then I can access this brush easily next time without having to recreate it. So now we're going to go over to Photopea. There's a lot of the steps that are the same in Photopea as in Photoshop, but then there's some things that are different. When they're the same, I'm going to kind of breeze through them but talk you through what I'm doing. But when they're a little different, I'm going to slow down. You draw your X the same, and you're going to go and define your brush, but there's some differences here. If we define our brush with our photograph showing, if I go into the brush tool, you can see I've already done it here. It's going to create a very muddy image because it's picking up the area around it, kind of that square, if I had a square drawn. So in order to create a clean X, I actually had to hide the background where the photo is before defining that new brush. But it was easy to do. Edit, define new, and brush. Once we've done that, we can Command or Control A, and we can delete just like in Photoshop. We wanted to keep the layer, that's why I did it that way, and then Command D. Now, in order to select the subject, I have to make sure I click on the background. You have to do that in Photoshop as well. And I'm going to do Object Selection. So if I come over here, you can see that it's giving me an error up there, and that's because I don't have a selection, yet I have Add to Selection picked. So we'll see, and it did okay, so we're okay with that. But we're gonna have to kind of keep going in here and reselecting until we get the areas that we want. You can't use shortcut keys to add and subtract, at least I haven't been able to get them to work on my Mac. But we can just keep going until we have this area all defined all the way around this dinosaur. And it's going to take some time. It's not as fast in Photopea, and you know, to me, time is money, so it's worth the $10 a month to not have to go through all of these steps because Photoshop does do a better job. What I didn't tell you in Photoshop is I have my default setting to use the cloud to select my object when I'm using that object selection tool. If you don't have that preset done, you will have to select it in the drop down. If I pop back over to Photoshop, I'll show you what I mean. So if you go to W and you click select subject, you're going to get the device. I get the cloud because I selected that in my preferences. I will talk about preferences in a different video. Just know that you have to select cloud for a more accurate selection. So we're going to go back over here. I've got it close enough for what we're doing. So we're going to go with this. Now, if I wanted to get the X's inside, I would have to go through that modify selection. It's the same here. Selection, modify, and modify it by half the size of my brush. I'm not going to do that here. We're just going to put it around the edge so you can see how it works. The shapes and dynamics work the same. So let's go ahead and go to our make selection. We're going to go ahead and make a path. So I have to get on the marquee tool. That's the same. Make path. I have my path here. And then I'm going to go to the brush tool and I'm going to select the brush that I created. It did not automatically select it for me. Maybe it will for you. And then we're going to go up to tip shape. We're going to work on our spacing. We're going to work on our size. And then we're going to go to the tip dynamics. The control is going to be direction. There's less choices here, but the one we need is there, so that is good. Now here's where things will differ. We cannot just hit enter and have it apply to the image. It's not going to work. Instead, what we have to do is we have to go over to our layers panel. We have to click path, and then we have to click this little empty circle right here. And when we do that, you can see that we now have the X's around the path that we created. I did not get his stomach selected, so it put it on the inside, but once you've got your selection defined, it will work the same here. You can also go back. We can delete the path just the same. Actually, you can't right click, so you will have to drag it down. And then you go over to your layers panel and you can click on this layer and you can see I forgot to click on the blank layer when I did that, so I cannot do anything to those X's. So if I want to do something to those X's, I'm going to undo until I get my X's not on there. I'm going to select my layers, the empty layer panel, and then I'm going to apply it. And then I'll go ahead and delete the path because we don't need it. And I'm going to go back here, and now you can see it is on my own layer. So if I wanted to bevel emboss and create that 3D look, now I can do that. It's down here in the EFF instead of FX, and it's going to have all the same features you can work on like we did in Photoshop. But this is Dana with Dana Digital Tutorials. I think that's it, and I hope that it helps you. You have a great day.